I stood my ground against my principal's chaos, and after a lot of struggle, I helped get her fired. My students cheered. I found myself in my mid-20s, recently graduated and eager to embark on my teaching journey. I secured a position at a Title I elementary school close to my residence, teaching art. I was thrilled about the prospect of walking to work. Nevertheless, I was so absorbed in my own thoughts that I overlooked numerous warning signs. Warning sign number 1 week prior to the start of school, I had called and emailed the office staff and my principal to inquire about obtaining my keys and badge so I could prepare for the school year. I received no response from either party. Thus, I contacted the district office to find out when and where I could collect my keys and badge. 2 days before classes began, I received an email from my administrator suggesting that I should have been more patient and not contacted the main office regarding my keys and badge. Eventually, I got everything I needed and entered my classroom, only to be horrified by the amount of work ahead of me. It seemed my room had been utilized as a storage area, filled with stacked tables and desks, 8 filing cabinets, and over 100 chairs scattered throughout the space. With assistance from my incredible custodian, a shout out to all custodians who are vital in helping teachers prepare for the school year, I managed to clear out the area. Challenge number 1 accomplished. Warning sign number 2, it was now the first day of classes, and I had yet to receive any information about the schedules specifically, which days I would see particular classes. I emailed my principal once more, seeking clarity on the schedule and requesting a digital document to print. A few minutes later, I received a response advising me to stop pressuring and bullying her. I replied, apologizing if I had made her feel pressured, but expressed that knowing my class schedule would be greatly appreciated. This leads to warning sign number 3 at 8:10 a.m., mere minutes after the school day commenced. I finally received my schedule only to discover that I was assigned 2 classes simultaneously. Note, while my school was not large, we had 14 classes serving grades kindergarten through 6th. This meant I would have at least 46 students in one room by myself. Additionally, I had 7 45-minute class periods daily and saw every class each day of the week, with only a 30-minute lunch, the time I spent on lunch duty. I approached my principal to discuss the possibility of adjusting the schedule so I could have time to plan and prepare between classes without sacrificing instructional time. I was met with her yelling at me, insisting that I should simply handle it since it was my first year teaching. Determined not to, just deal with it, I reviewed the teacher's contract for the district. It contained a section regarding classroom size, stipulating that if a class exceeded 30 students, an educational assistant would be assigned to help. After a month and a half of struggling, I brought this up with my principal, only to be, you guessed it, denied. She claimed there was no funding in the budget, and I would have to make do without assistance or quit. I am stubborn and resolved to make things work with the limited resources at my disposal. But it was challenging to prepare and plan for each upcoming day, assign meaningful grades, maintain referrals, and stay in contact with families. My schedule had me at school from 6 a.m., when the morning custodian arrived, until 9 p.m., when the night janitor left on weekdays, and my weekends were consumed with planning and grading. When it came time for my first teacher evaluation, I was apprehensive. However, to my surprise, my principal marked all my performance as satisfactory. Little did I know this was part of her strategy all along. Weeks passed, and my frustration reached a peak. I consulted with our union about the double classes, expressing that this arrangement was unsustainable and that my classroom couldn't safely accommodate more than 30 students, let alone 46. They assured me they would handle it, but several weeks passed with no action taken. As Thanksgiving approached and parent-teacher conferences concluded, I allowed myself to relax for a couple of days. I went to a potluck dinner with some old friends, and here's where a significant change began while chatting with an acquaintance and his new husband about my teaching experience. I casually mentioned how, although my students were wonderful, I often felt frustrated due to the lack of time to provide them with the attention they deserved, especially with 2 classes at once. I noticed the husband's interest peaked as he inquired about my school. I shared its name, thinking nothing of it. Unbeknownst to me, I was speaking with my principal's supervisor. The following Monday, my administrator stormed into my classroom at 8:05 a.m., shouting and threatening to fire me, ensuring that I would never work in education again. I was stunned and bewildered. However, later that week during our staff meeting, we discussed a change in the schedule that would allow only one class in my room at a time for an hour, and I would see each class only twice a week instead of daily. It was transformative. The students were happier, I felt calmer, and I could attend to individual student needs, enabling me to leave by 4 p.m. each day. Unfortunately, my newfound happiness was short-lived. I began noticing my principal watching my classroom closely and frequently observing me. It felt invasive. Some of my lively students would come in quiet and unable to concentrate, and when I asked if everything was all right, they would dissolve into tears, saying, "I don't want you to leave." Perplexed, I always reassured them, "Oh, student's name, I have absolutely no plans to go anywhere. You are the best students a teacher could hope for." This would temporarily lift their spirits, but their distress would resurface the following week. The revelation came the day before Christmas break when my principal entered my room, accompanied by one of her aides, who also served as an unofficial union representative, to inform me that I was being placed on a teacher support plan. This plan was designed to evaluate whether my contract with the district would be renewed at the end of the school year. Shocked, I noticed my union representative snickering and leaving with our administrator. I felt ill and emotionally drained. It wasn't until I returned home and read the details of the plan that I felt a surge of anger. I had reached my breaking point. That was the beginning of my carefully devised plan for retaliation. A few crucial details: our principal often arrived whenever she pleased, showing up anywhere from 7:45 a.m., our actual contract hours, to as late as 9:30 a.m. There was even a day she arrived at noon without prior notice. I also knew she had repeatedly renewed a specific after-school care contract, which was not free for families, even though the district funded it to offer the service at no cost. On top of that, I was aware that the individual running that program was living with our principal. During winter break, my acquaintance and his husband invited me out for drinks. Enjoying a good cocktail while needing a stiff drink, I joined them. Initially, I aimed to steer the conversation away from school, but the new husband inquired if conditions had improved after he spoke to my principal about the double classes. That's when I found out he was her supervisor. I asked, "What do you mean you talked to my principal? How do you know her?" New husband, "Oh, you didn't know. I'm the supervising administrator for that group of schools." My jaw dropped and I began to hyperventilate. Noticing my distress, he asked what was wrong. I shared everything: the yelling, threats of termination, being placed on the support plan, and the constant, unannounced classroom observations. His expression shifted from concern to surprise, then reddened with anger. He told me, "I have always felt uneasy about her, and I've often wondered why there are so many new teachers at that school each year. What else can you inform me about the situation?" I hesitated to divulge every detail, but my acquaintance assured me it would be all right. He had encountered this look before, and they were on my side. Thus, I revealed everything I knew. They both sat there, taken aback and speechless at the revelations. Once break concluded, I dreaded returning to my classroom, but the thought of seeing my students motivated me. As I walked through the hall toward my mailbox, I spotted several of my students who had previously cried and expressed their fears about my departure. They rushed over, embracing me tightly, exclaiming, "You're here, you're here." I replied, "Of course I'm here. Why would I leave the best students ever?" They responded, "But the principal said you were going to leave us because you didn't want to be here, and we should give you trouble before you left." I struggled to manage my rage and explained, "Oh, maybe she was referring to my plans to visit family over the break. There's no need to worry, I'm still here." Yes, this dreadful woman tried to incite misbehavior in my class to justify writing me up for lacking rapport with my students. I was furious. In the next class, I asked one of my students to create a comic book depicting the conversation they had with my principal when she informed them to give me trouble in class. Thus, Phase 1 commenced. Phase 2 involved contacting my boss's boss, requesting that another administrator accompany my principal during her teacher support observations. He agreed, but instructed me not to inform my principal just yet. The day of my first observation arrived. She strolled in without a notebook or any materials to take notes, looking confident as if she would easily succeed in having me dismissed. She was taken aback when her boss entered with a laptop, sitting beside her and taking notes on my performance. Stumbling, she asked me for a notepad, to which I replied, "I don't have an extra, but I do have poster paper," as we were creating movie posters for a project linked to our comic books. "I hope for better preparation on your part during future observations to avoid disrupting my class and stealing time from their instruction." Her boss simply smirked. For Phase 3, I made a habit of calling my newfound ally, her boss, whenever she arrived late to school. He would conduct random visits if he was nearby, documenting her tardiness and her failure to submit paperwork regarding her leave minutes. On average, he would stop by 2 times a week for a solid month. I believe he even enlisted someone from Human Resources to come observe her at 9 a.m., and she still wasn't present. Finally, Phase 4, my favorite step, getting the parents involved. I started chatting with parents who frequently picked up their children late. They expressed difficulties arriving on time and often needing to leave early. When I informed them about our after-school care program, they voiced concerns about the costs. I clarified that, since we were a Title I school, after-school care was offered free of charge, funded by the district, and handed them a flyer I created that included the website and instructions to fill out the necessary forms. This information spread among parents who were previously paying the contractor directly, believing it to be a paid service. Attending the subsequent PTA meeting was quite entertaining. I also ensured the principal knew I was the one who enlightened parents about the free after-school program. As a result, numerous investigations commenced at our school. Upper-level administration from the central office began visiting, auditors arrived, and our union eventually got involved, seeking to portray themselves as heroes or victims of the situation. The outcome the remainder of the school year was notably calmer. My new ally ensured that the teacher support plan was removed from my teaching record, and my principal was barred from conducting my second-term evaluations or any informal observations. The problematic after-school care contractor was terminated and replaced by one recommended by the district, while my students flourished, creating outstanding posters and comics. At the end of the year, as we received our assignments for the following year, my principal made one last desperate attempt to have me leave, claiming, "Our budget doesn't allow for an art teacher next year, and I suggest you seek employment elsewhere." I laughed in her face, responding, "Nice try. My position is funded through a state bond and isn't affected by your district's budgetary constraints. If there's nothing else, I'll be taking my leave now." As I exited, I could hear her slamming her desk and cursing furiously. On the last day of school, one of my students shared his comic book at our talent show, revealing how the principal instructed him to give me trouble. The already irate parents only grew more furious that an adult would encourage such behavior in a child. I believe she even had a shoe hurled at her when she rushed onstage to halt him from completing his story. To no one's surprise, the final day of school, she announced over the intercom, once the students had departed, that she would be resigning, moving on to a different position where she was needed, and expressing that she would miss almost all of us. I later discovered that, after stalking her on LinkedIn 2 years later, she had to secure a position outside the district, an hour away, to find another administrative role. She only lasted a year and subsequently stepped down to teach English in a different school within another district the following year. As for the ending of my student's comic book, it concluded, the art hero rallied the students against the furious principal to make her see the errors of her ways, but the angry principal could not find happiness, so she departed, and the power of joy filled the school once more. Finn. Story 2. I reported my neighbor for her dog's poop, caught her kids stealing my bags, then sent proof to management she got kicked out. I shared this on our entitled parents, and several individuals recommended I also post it here for you wonderful readers. My apologies for the length. This incident took place at the last apartment complex where I resided. My significant other and I were leasing a ground-floor apartment in a really pleasant community. I wouldn't characterize it as a luxury establishment, but our ground-floor unit included a small patio at the rear that opened into a beautiful courtyard featuring hammocks, a walking path, and an outdoor fireplace with seating, among other amenities. Many residents walked their dogs there or allowed their children to play on the grass, including us. We owned a 1-year-old cane corso, whom we adopted after living in the unit for approximately 2.5 months. She was just 8 weeks old at that time. She is an exemplary dog, having been well trained. We could allow her outside to relieve herself, and she would return promptly, even amidst distractions such as people and other dogs. We always stood on the patio to supervise, since our pet agreement stipulated that we couldn't leave her unattended. If she did relieve herself, we would immediately dispose of her waste, which is standard procedure in most apartment communities. We kept a small step trash can outside explicitly for her waste bags because we didn't want to dispose of them inside, and the only exterior trash cans were located on the opposite side of the building, which I agree is quite impractical. This trash can was genuinely small, similar to what one might place in a bathroom between the toilet and the wall. Additionally, we hung her waste bags on the patio door handle for easy access to avoid searching for them whenever needed. Then, a woman and her child moved into a ground floor unit just 2 doors down from ours. It was no big deal. One day, we encountered her while she was carrying groceries, and my significant other held the door open for her. She seemed somewhat entitled but was polite, and her child, likely around 10 to 11 years old, did not look up from his phone. This behavior is quite typical among children today. They also owned a small, fluffy black and white dog that was adorable but not trained very well. I was unsure of the breed, but it was considerably smaller than our already quite large puppy. After roughly 2 weeks, we noticed dog feces on the grass right outside our patio. We discovered this the hard way when my boyfriend accidentally stepped in it on his way outside. Fortunately, he was wearing shoes. It was obvious that these feces did not belong to our dog for 2 reasons. 1, we consistently cleaned up after her immediately after she relieved herself, and 2, the feces were unmistakably from a small dog, not our 70-pound puppy. We had been in the apartment for about 7 to 8 months by then without any prior issues, so we figured it belonged to the neighbor's small dog. I wrote her a polite note that said something along the lines of, "Hello, neighbor. We observed that some of the feces from your dog have not been cleaned and are located right off our patio. According to the pet agreement we all signed, it is essential that we all pick up after our own dogs. I understand this might have been an oversight, so we would appreciate it if you could take care of this issue moving forward. Your neighbors in unit." Since she was not home, I slipped the note under her door and returned to my apartment. A few hours later, she knocked on my door, visibly angered, insisting that it could not possibly be her dog's feces and questioning how I dared to make such an assumption. I felt horrible and immediately apologized, expressing that I did not intend to offend her and that it could have been someone else's dog. She told me never to bother her with nonsense like that again and stormed off. I was left feeling bewildered. Not more than 3 days later, I was sitting on my patio reading a book and enjoying the nice weather when I saw their little dog dash out from their back door alone and come over to me. I greeted the pup, as I am fond of dogs, and then it proceeded to relieve itself right off my patio before running back home and scratching at the door to be let inside. I observed her child slide the door open just enough to allow the dog in before shutting it again without stepping outside to clean up the waste. I was frustrated because I had directly witnessed that it was indeed their dog and that no one was supervising it while outside. I took a waste bag, cleaned up the droppings, wrote a somewhat less polite note addressing her child's neglect in supervising their dog or ensuring it was taken care of, and placed both the waste bag and the note on their patio by the door before returning to my reading. The entitled mother was quicker to respond this time, marching right up to me with the note in hand. She argued that her child was merely a child and probably forgot to check for waste. I stated that I did not care. Her child was certainly old enough to stand outside for a few minutes and pick up after the dog. She retorted that there were no waste bags or trash cans on her side of the building and expressed discomfort in allowing her child to walk the long way around to take care of the waste. The next part of the conversation was my mistake, in retrospect. I suggested that she could place a trash can like ours on her patio and keep her own waste bags nearby, just as we do for our dog. She glanced at our supplies, huffed, rolled her eyes, and refused to do anything about the feces before walking away. By this point, My annoyance was intensifying. I kept a close watch on my patio door over the next couple of days, waiting for another incident. Sure enough, on the evening of day 2, just when I was about to lose hope, I saw their puppy scamper outside toward my patio. I quickly pulled out my phone, took pictures of the dog alone outside, which was not permitted, and captured images of it relieving itself, then took another photo an hour later of the waste still present, all time-stamped. I sent an email to the apartment management, who were generally amiable, and they quickly responded, promising to issue a warning to her. Almost immediately, this woman returned, furious with me for being petty in reporting her to the management, which had resulted in a $150 fine for not cleaning up after her dog's waste. It's important to note that these fines were infrequent. The apartment complex did not use poo prints to identify waste. In fact, for the office to issue a fine for dog feces, they needed actual evidence that it belonged to a specific tenant's dog and that it had not been cleaned, which I provided through the photos I had taken and stamped. I informed her that I had made several polite attempts to resolve the issue directly with her before, and it was ultimately her responsibility for failing to adhere to the pet agreement that we all had to sign for those of us with dogs. She went on a tirade about being a single mother who worked during the day and how her precious child should not be expected to pick up after their dog. I countered that a 10 or 11-year-old is more than capable of taking responsibility for cleaning up after a dog, and if they were not mature enough for this task, perhaps she should be the one letting the dog out, or whoever was at home needed to attend to it. She became furious, accusing me of lacking understanding of what it means to be a single mother. She claimed that her mother watched her child while she was at work, and I was unreasonable to expect her mother to care for both her child and her dog before storming off again. Although I anticipated further confrontation, nothing happened afterward. The irony here is that I am a single mother myself. My son is not my significant other's child, and I have raised him alone for 2.5 years before meeting my current partner, so I fully comprehend the challenges involved in single parenting, particularly as I live exactly 1,000 miles from my nearest family member and had never benefited from assistance in watching my child. In the following weeks, we did not find any more feces near our patio. However, we noticed that our waste bags were running out and our trash can was filling up more quickly than usual. I had my suspicions and wanted to validate them. We had recently purchased a few small security cameras for various reasons, and I had my boyfriend install one on the patio. We aimed it so it would capture our door and trash can while avoiding views of the courtyard or the other residents' apartments. We respect privacy here. As expected, on the same evening that my boyfriend set up the camera, I observed their child walking onto our patio, taking a waste bag, leaving the camera's view, and then returning to dispose of it in our trash can. I was infuriated, but I also did not wish to confront the woman or her child. Consequently, I relocated the waste bags to inside the door handle. Since it is a glass door, they were still visible, but the sliding door remained locked. The next morning, I heard a knock at the back patio door and found the child standing there, looking irritated. I did not open the door and instead spoke loudly enough to inquire what he needed. He demanded a waste bag for his dog's feces. I explained that these bags were for our dog and were not available for others to use. The apartment complex provides waste bags in a dispenser located by the trash can on the opposite side of the building. He began insisting on a waste bag, saying that his mother told him he could use ours, and he pounded on the glass a few times, presumably attempting to intimidate me, finally shouting that he was going to tell his mother about my refusal. I responded that he was welcome to do so, and I would convey the same information to her. Sure enough, minutes later, his mother appeared on my patio, also insisting on a waste bag for her dog's feces. I denied her request and asked her to step off my patio, explaining that I felt unsafe and uncomfortable due to her presence. My significant other was not home at the time. She called me a spoiled child. I am 24, and continued to demand I let her use my waste bags, claiming that I had previously agreed to do so. I reiterated that I had instructed her to obtain her own waste bags and follow my example to keep them readily accessible and put her own trash can on her patio rather than using the bags I purchased for my dog, and filling up my small trash can with her dog's waste. I pointed out that she could utilize a plastic shopping bag if she did not want to buy her own waste bags, or she could use the bags provided by the complex on the other side of the building. She continued to rant at me until I finally warned her that if she did not leave my patio, I would call the police due to her harassment. The apartment office was closed on Sundays, and of course, it was a Sunday. She acted like she intended to call my bluff, but just as my boyfriend returned home and walked up behind me to ask what was happening, she ended up dragging her child away, yet again, leaving the feces in the grass outside my patio. Once she departed, I once more took a time-stamped picture of the feces, downloaded the footage from my security camera showing her child taking my waste bags and discarding them in my trash can, along with the footage of them yelling at me and my denial, and emailed everything to the apartment management. I expressed my feelings of being unsafe and uncomfortable in my own home, as well as how both she and her child presumed they had the right to come onto my patio and take my belongings. I also went outside, collected her dog's waste, examined our trash can, and retrieved the bags containing her dog's feces, which were significantly smaller than my dog's due to the evident difference in size. I unsealed all the bags and dumped the contents right on her patio, directly outside her door. On Monday, I received a response from the office personnel stating she would address the issue. By Friday, a moving truck was present, and the woman and her child were vacating the premises. I suspect they were either evicted or strongly encouraged to leave before the formal eviction process began. After speaking with some of our other friendlier neighbors, it became clear that we were not the only ones filing complaints against her. They had lived in the community for only about 2 to 3 months and had managed to upset so many residents that they were forced out. Sometimes, I contemplate whether I should feel remorseful for contributing to their eviction, but honestly, I cannot muster any guilt. It is not my fault that she was an entitled individual who simply could not find the motivation to use a shopping bag for cleaning up after her dog. I never received any communication from her regarding the feces I placed on her patio, but I like to believe she stepped in them unknowingly and learned a lesson about entitlement. I am confident they were given more than a week's notice to vacate, as those are the tenancy laws in this area, but she packed up and left in a hurry. It seems she did not want to remain in a place where she clearly perceived herself as an adversary. I cannot say for certain whether she was evicted or just asked to leave or comply with the lease agreement. The office cannot disclose that kind of information, and given our recent interactions, we were not exactly on speaking terms for her to share the details with me. Summary: an entitled mother allows her dog to defecate freely without cleaning up after it. I ask her to either pick up the feces or have her son do so. She refuses, and ends up receiving a fine from the apartment management after I submit photographs of her unattended dog and the feces left behind. She subsequently allows her child to take my supplies from my patio, prompting me to send video evidence and photographs to the management, leading to their eventual expulsion from the complex. Story 3. Fiancé cheats with woman he meets on business trip after 6 years together. I, 29 female, was with my partner, 30 male. For over 6 years, we began dating during my senior year of college. Initially, we lived in the same city, but he lost his job about 6 months into our relationship. At that time, he moved back home across the country while I remained to work and felt quite content in my own life. When the pandemic hit, we were separated, but for the next 2 to 3 years, we visited one another, traveled together, and during my work trips, I traveled to his city, seeing him every week for a year. Then, at the end of the pandemic, he secured a new job in his city, and I decided I wanted to end the long-distance situation. I found a new, better job that included relocation assistance, sold my condominium in my city in less than 3 months, and moved across the country. I did not realize it at the time, but it was a significant decision. I left my hometown where I had grown up, attended college, and worked, along with my friends and family, to be in his home city surrounded by his friends and family. We got an apartment together, and I also brought my cat. We were happy for about a year, and then he mentioned looking at engagement rings one day while we were at a mall. Over the next 3 to 4 months, we discussed rings, and we planned a trip to Europe, unrelated, where he proposed. I believe that was his moment of realization after the proposal. He began to express concerns he had, issues that he had not mentioned for 4 to 5 years at that point. I was taken aback by the problems he raised because I did not think I had changed significantly, and we had been living together for at least a year. Our jobs were stable, we had good friends, and we frequently hosted gatherings. I genuinely believe he simply was not ready to settle down. I was his first serious girlfriend. I had dated before him, and he had thoughts about whether there might be someone better out there. Approximately 6 months after the proposal, he traveled to Asia for 3 weeks for work. I visited him for 1 week, and after I left, he joined a group tour and met a girl who was traveling solo. They apparently spent half a day together after the tour, and when he returned, he began making Facebook calls to her every other night without informing me. I discovered this when I noticed his location was not at the gym, as he had stated, but instead he was on a call with her. One evening, when I attempted to call him via Facebook Messenger, it informed me that this user is already on a call. When I realized this, I confronted him and asked to see their messages. He essentially remarked that due to our issues, his mind, even subconsciously, was wandering. I was at a loss for words. The messages were fairly innocuous and could have been exchanged between friends, but I simply told him that he had non-platonic feelings for this girl and needed to stop, or else it would not be acceptable. He assured me that he had ceased communication with her. 9 months later, we attended couples therapy, had made efforts to resolve our problems, and honestly, I think we tried. He began to withdraw, and whenever we attempted to discuss things, he would say, "I can't do this." That evolved into "I want a break," which ultimately turned into "I want to break up." In hindsight, I remained in this situation for too long, and as he was slipping away, I should have extricated myself. At some point, he resumed contact with her. I believe this occurred when he requested, and I consented to continue living in the same apartment without speaking to each other. Clearly, that arrangement was not beneficial. After 9 months of silence, he claims, he told me the week after that he had developed feelings for her, and then a week later, he stated he wanted to do something for himself for once and wished to pursue those feelings. You could label it a quarter-life crisis, or perhaps a feeling of oppression from immigrant parents, but at that point, I realized I needed to distance myself or lose my self-respect, so I said it was time to break up. He moved back home, his parents lived nearby, and for the next 2 months, we managed the logistics of moving out. Less than a couple of weeks after we officially ended things, his male friends began following her on Instagram. She has a private account with only a couple of hundred followers, so he must have introduced her. I later discovered that less than 2 months later, he traveled to Asia to visit her. Soon after, a couple's Instagram profile appeared with their selfie as the profile picture, and the tagline read, "Our story, written with love by love for love." Everything about this is revolting. From his friends following her, we hosted them in our home at least once every 3 weeks, and we saw them bi-weekly. I invited them into my space. To this public rebound, showing no regard for how others might perceive it, his friends have remarked how evident it is that he cheated with such little time in between. I am relieved I am no longer involved with someone of such poor character and have gained valuable insights for future relationships. I also feel protective about losing my independence in future partnerships and the power dynamics that were present here. I supported him for nearly 3 years while he was unemployed. He expressed to me that he felt I was his only source of support, as his parents made him feel inadequate about his situation, and he was reluctant to confide in friends. Then, once he secured a good job again, he felt empowered to address all the issues he never mentioned before, demonstrating a lack of respect for me. I have always been capable and deserving of someone who values me, and I regret not recognizing that sooner. I should have ended the relationship at least a year earlier.